On a recent streamcast of Amico All Access, the panel were asked to discuss which of Intellivision's stated 10 guiding commandments of good game design the company could, in their opinion, get away with deviating away from, and which of those tenets, if broken, would cause the biggest fallout for the newcomer comeback hardware manufacturer. I wanted to chime in, but as I'm more a rules breaker than a commandments kind of guy, rather than pick one, I wanted to go through the list in its entirety because there's some deep-rooted rationales for many of these to dive into. Though, I think Intellivision does have a good deal of wiggle room with these commandments. And I anticipate the company to bend a number of these, maybe even breaking one or two and moving forward.
10 commandments for all to obey.
Some more blatantly. Others, I think, really do drive their vision of where they see themselves fitting on the stage, and they're mission-driven to stay within those bounds. A disclaimer then, that part of this video is a bit of a meandering exercise, a what if, walking through where a company could stray.
I've fallen, and I can't get up.
Mind you, a company that has given no indication of intention of veering all that far off its principles. So keep that in perspective. That said, let's check out these 10 tenets guiding Intellivision, their importance in establishing the company and the games they want to make, the likelihood any are broken, and the impact, if any, should the company loosen or depart from them. This tenet, I think, is the centerpiece of Intellivision's strategy, and I can't see them moving far from. Although the community's early detractors have voiced pretty uniform disdain for this decision.
Oh, come on!
My quick take observation, this probably speaks more to how the premise of the console just isn't courting a typical video game consumer audience. It's not catering to their preferred fare.
All of the games are appropriate for everyone. So no graphic violence, no bad language. These are games that everyone can play.
What you don't hear are convincing arguments why the target audience in focus, families and casual players, would balk at the decision to forego teen, mature, or adults-only rated games. There are, in fact, a couple really smart reasons why the companies adopted this E and E10 Plus only content promise. For one, the landscape at present is crowded with home video game platforms. Yet, there isn't an accessible system on the market showcasing how it can cater to or would act as any kind of a safe haven for a broad general audience that includes children. That point immediately differentiates Amico from Xbox, PlayStation, PC, Stadia, Luna, any mobile platforms, and your stream TV box solutions or media sticks that are accessing some limited game libraries. None of these make that stated promise, and most don't put much attention to that audience. Nintendo, Apple, and Amazon's Kindle Fire Kids Edition tablets are really the nearest mass market competitors who are occupying this family-friendly space. And while each brings something different to the table, they aren't offering what Amico is presenting. Amazon Kindle Fire Kids Edition tablets aren't intended as family or play-together devices. They're safe options to entertain a younger child, but the selection of curated games and learning content isn't designed to be played together, or really of much interest to anyone above that youngest audience's age. And managing Amazon's pushed and auto-enabled content becomes a chore. And at the end of the day, the interaction is still a lot like the mobile experience, only on a slightly larger surface. Swipe, drag, or tap the glass. Your play surface is your view surface. It's solitary gaming. Apple Arcade makes a point to mostly stick to content that's teen rated and under. It's cost competitive for access to a curated library of games, although it's an experience still requiring Apple devices. Note here just how much focus is on phones and is single player. This is a best of curation of the App Store and a welcome addition that they've done a great job of. But it isn't a shared family experience pushing play together. And better than 9 out of 10 of those user experiences in that audience are still going to play it on a solitary iPhone or iPad, where touchscreen controls are going to dictate the kinds of games put into Apple Arcade. That's why Apple selected the games it has. To many in that Apple audience, requiring a controller just illustrates to that audience that they're not equipped for the experience that's on offer. And sure, you can buy a controller to then pair with your device. But is a casual audience going to do that? And piece together a gaming solution that then meets the intended play devices the developers have in mind?
Not today, bruh.
Then there's Nintendo Switch, which is marketed, some of the time, to families. Plus, Nintendo has generally been long perceived by the public as family-friendly, with good reason. True to form, they still deliver prominent kid-forward content. But Nintendo isn't promising those parents or relatives that they can gift the Switch and then pay no attention to the available games that are on their platform. There's a good amount of age-inappropriate content to then filter out. Every "I want this game" request from a child requires some level of screening by a content-literate adult, regularly managing parental controls, and the expectation they'll be digging around to know what's in each game. I think detractors writing off the appeal of family-friendly don't factor in how much diligence is put upon parents when companies adopt such take-all-comers approach to content, as Nintendo has more recently done. You can manage access via parental controls, but they're not defaulted, nor are they a perfect solution. Multiple users or additional profiles on a shared device create these easily exploited loopholes or inadvertent blocks. In Nintendo's case, it's yet one more app on a phone to not get locked out of, on the device one more password to manage. And there's still the cases where, even with the most diligent parenting, sometimes the company screws it up and mislabels or lets the wrong games through. And parents' experience with parental controls is often a question of how soon before they get cracked by half too clever 7 or 8-year-olds. Today's kids, like yesterday's kids, are considerably more tech-savvy than their parents. Nintendo's giving parents an app to play Content Cop, and it's all on the parents' due diligence and awareness. I mean, 3 cheers for personal responsibility, but if the content were disarmed, don't you think a few parents might opt for a different model? Isn't there a modicum of appeal there?
I'm not a parent, so I'm not going to say anything. I don't want to come across rude here, but I'm just going to say parental controls exist on all modern consoles.
And if the kids know how to get past the parental controls,
then that's part of them being a kid.
They're probably like 15 years old on the computer.
No, I mean, there are ways to be careful about that.
Sorry guys, when a kid can discover workarounds and exploits, they're probably old enough to handle it. That's part of being a kid. Just doesn't jive with parents.
You please come out. All right, Ma, I'll be right out.
I was getting closer now. The tension was terrible. What was it?
Dismissing whole cloth that the issue's a concern suggests A periodic topic on general audience news and talk shows like Good Morning America or The Today Show covers kids and access to technology, parental controls on devices, network nanny software solutions, and the like, usually exposing how kids tend to circumnavigate parental controls and access restricted content or parts of the internet that parents are trying to prevent access to. These don't look like 15-year-olds. Not that 15-year-olds who are hacking systems or exploiting parental locks don't also have younger siblings who they're then exposing to the same content that parents are trying to restrict. But it ain't a problem. Kids guess parents' PIN numbers and passwords because these are likely the same passwords or couple of pins that we use on dozens of personal devices and sites to access Hulu, Disney, Netflix, the home alarm, our computers, our tablets, unlocking our phones. We don't all memorize 17 diverse and well-protected pins and passwords.
The overwhelming majority of parents put no controls on the devices.
On a Facebook parents gaming group, a dad recently divulged how his 9-year-old daughter applied just enough Vaseline to leave a trace film.
Girl, everybody needs Vaseline.
So that she could then take back the device, make out the numbers pressed that she could glean from those discrete finger smudges, and figure his password.
Clever girl.
YouTube has numerous popular videos on how to overcome parental locks and exploit settings. Websites pop up routinely, strictly with instructions on how to bypass these measures. And yeah, tenacity and getting to that forbidden item is part of growing up, but, well, the measures out there are good enough and there's no problem here to address, let's move on, doesn't fly. If you can bring to market a system that mitigates parents' chief concerns, is simple and worry-free in regards to content, then you've created a product that has common cause and merit to a number of parents, grandparents, favorite aunts and uncles, and millions of educators. That is one massive market to distinguish your platform from the rest. This is an exploit and a niche that Intellivision can differentiate and capitalize on. So, from a purely product perspective, there's a market opening on this looking out for families front. At best, trusted brands aren't as rigorous or consumer-friendly as they once were, nowhere near how Intellivision proposes to be. And at worst case for Intellivision, the competition in this area of the field consists of perhaps 2, 3 of those 20-plus gaming platforms competing for consumer dollars. It just makes more sense to carve their niche here, where their competition is contained and there's ample room to differentiate and still succeed in 2nd, 3rd, even 4th place, than trying to compete for attention with the now oversaturated market vying for that core gaming demographic, where they'd need to find some alternate standout ways to win over a large enough audience to then fund the requisite technology driving that flashy system, along with all of those eye-catching games. There's a reason so many competitors failed at this measure in the past. It is prohibitively expensive to convince gamers that you have better games on offer that can then pry them away from their PlayStations and Nintendos. That market is its own arena, and trying to compete for those consumers, it's not the smart play. The other reason I think E and E10 Plus makes a world of sense for Intellivision is that it's a surprisingly easy decision when looking to the total of all gaming content. For all the disdain that Intellivision may be artificially limiting their player base or their market appeal, usually thrown out there without any homework on the subject, more than 4/5 of all video games ever created would rate as an E or an E10 Plus game today. Better than 80% of every game ever produced fit the content policies laid out for the system. And that's 70% of every game since 2000, since gaming's shifted more notably to a teen and mature themed audience. And even though Amico features a good share of vintage retro games being reimagined, there's still a healthy amount of modern games out there to fit the bill. The question that strikes me is, where does opportunity lie for Intellivision? Where in the field do they see the opening? And the answer to me is very clear, but I want to show why they're going in this particular route. Every console appeals to a target audience. These companies deliberately select who they vie for based on what audience is realistically available to them. They then develop or publish games to pair to that audience. And while they'll all take any buyer of any age, gender, shape, there's always a target player in mind that they message and market to. We see this in commercials and ads, in tone, and especially reflected in the games getting approved by the hardware companies themselves. The ESRB ratings are a very useful indicator that tell us how much value and focus a hardware manufacturer or a publisher has on a particular audience. The more mature games the system allows, the likelihood it's making its pitch to adults, or vice versa, since adults would be the only market to have no difficulty in buying those games. While libraries that are significantly skewed towards E and E10+ suggest the console plays it safe with families. First, we'll look at Sony. Sony's systems have consistently put out libraries featuring 45 to 55% teen and mature rated content. With each generation, the percentage of mature rated games grows, as does the combination of teen and mature content versus E or E and E10+. Mature rated games are some of its biggest sellers, motivating Sony to then veer further and further in this direction, making the PS4 a much tougher sell as an all-around family system than the original PlayStation was 20 years prior. When Sony saw the landscape, saw Sega's success against Nintendo, and figured teens and young adults were its audience moving forward.
Omaha. Pinned down on that godforsaken beach. Thinking if I lay there, I'll maybe die. But if I get up, there ain't no maybe about it. Then one man broke through. Michael.
When the Templars murdered my family. When the whole bloody world's gone crazy. Hellcat, Sector 9, to Michael! Michael! For all he does. For all of us. To Michael. To Michael! To Michael! To Michael!
PlayStation is not, nor has it ever been, in the business of marketing its platform as a family-friendly product or a child's toy. Microsoft's entry was not so different from Sony's. Microsoft knew that for its platform to have any chance at relevance, its path to that promised land lay with a more mature consumer.
As you can see, that's an increase of fantastic for this company.
In the late 90s, they were already a familiar entity to PC owners, and Microsoft Studios had limited game history developing software for adult PC users.
Seatbelt and prepare for takeoff with Microsoft Flight Simulator for Windows 95, the latest version of the most popular entertainment title ever produced for the personal computer.
Microsoft, ready to play. From the co-designer of the hit title Civilization comes Age of Empires. From the Stone Age to the Iron Age, experience 10,000 years of amazing discoveries as you build your tribe into a great civilization.
So in that respect, a horizontal jump with the same demographic. More importantly, the landscape when Microsoft decided to launch the Xbox was already occupied by prominent players with their own flags planted. Sony and Sega both battled to the finish for the all-important teen and 20-something crowd. Meanwhile, Nintendo held an uncontested primacy over the kid-friendly and family market with its N64 and popular Game Boy Color. And this was ultimately the right move for Microsoft. You see since the original Xbox just how much they've doubled down on mature and teen content as a total in subsequent consoles. Which brings us to Nintendo. Ever the champion of gaming for the preteen crowd, Nintendo. Nintendo is that niche system playing for the family's attention. Or so it would seem. Accepting the GameCube, which was Nintendo's last tried effort to put out a powerful competitive system for the teenage crowd, arguably the most competent hardware of its era, and kind of a flop for the big end. Nintendo's systems have skewed heavily towards E for everyone and E10 plus fare. That is, until the Switch. After the mildly unsuccessful Wii U, Nintendo's taken an about-face in its approach to allowable content on its platform. Nintendo in the Switch era is not the Nintendo of old. Teen and mature content isn't just in, it's 40% of the game's library. That's PS2 and PS3 numbers. Nintendo now makes it a point to leave games untouched, where Sony or Microsoft would opt to censor. Sandra D ain't that good girl no more.
Tell me about it, stud.
Which means the lineup of the Switch looks less like previous consoles and more like, well, the competition of Sony or Microsoft's platforms. And where Intellivision sees this drift, this deliberate abandonment of a family-friendly mantle in favor of a Switch has everything approach, that's opportunity. It's not as though Stadia or Steam are going to fill that vacuum either. They're just as mature-themed centric as the competition. And while I know some of you are going to point to Nintendo's home run success with this approach, this Nintendo supporter really couldn't be happier for their new heights. It still doesn't negate the fact that hundreds of millions bought into the Game Boy Advance, the DS, the 3DS, the Wii, systems heavily reliant on E and E10 Plus content, to the point that more restrictive, higher-rated games were harder to find at retail. And it's not just Mario, Pokemon, or the Nintendo Mystique driving those purchases. Popular games, but a fraction of the attachment rate on any of those systems. Casuals and families found tons of games per system that were more suited for them. And sales were never particularly hurting for comparatively few teen and even fewer mature titles. No, those platforms were runaway successes, all with notably inferior graphics compared to the other competitor platforms of their era. But that's for another time. There's an audience on the table that hasn't bought into a Switch yet. Likely hasn't found an answer in Sony or Microsoft, in PC gaming, in the cloud, or the VR experience. And that's a good starting point for Intellivision to gain a foothold. We tend to put Switch into this solution for families category by default, because of Nintendo's historic fare. Because compared to the other two consoles, it has considerably far more to offer. It's entirely cartoonish graphics, and lots of regular E and E10 Plus fan favorites appear on the platform. But Nintendo is still going for an audience of everyone. Nintendo did spend 3 years showcasing the Switch as a system that wants more of Sony and Microsoft's hardcore audience. They'll go along providing content for anyone willing to buy it. And from a marketing perspective, that's exposed their family-friendly flank, which is surprisingly now an open lane, or at least a less contested one, for a company like Intellivision. It's the obvious direction. Even if Nintendo wanted to secure that market again, the Switch's library now belies any pitch they could make that they're deliberately family-friendly. Their image is now paired just as much with the more hardcore audience they've courted, and for Nintendo, that's great. They're the portable hybrid system with something for everyone. But that something is also a magnet for everything in being so. It's Intellivision's opening to then spend the next few years making its case to parents and families. Intellivision isn't losing some potential audience. They're casting the widest deliberate net. They have this thesis that if families were presented such a market option, it's important enough a factor to play into the ultimate purchasing decision. So I think it's among the smarter decisions going into this relaunch of the Intellivision brand. So then, what would it look like, and why would they ever break or bend this commitment? For one, I think with time they actually could get away with releasing some games down the line rated teen or PEGI 12, simply because they would have built up that level of trust, much like Nintendo has for decades, and now allows mature games on its platform to a large extent, and gets to still carry over that perception of being family-friendly, without too much public outcry or consideration of that shift. But in any case, I don't think they drift too far from this mandate, and so long that Intellivision stays within range, they can get away with adhering to the spirit of the law, while perhaps on a game or two, skirting the letter of the law.
But some action in my life. Back in the law, 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 back in the law. So much for the golden future.
Though it's really up to Intellivision how that decision to publish a game with a higher rating would ultimately affect their pitch to investors and retailers and partner buy-in, and whether they'd want to explain that asterisk. But I don't think a marginal deviation loses parents in the ways we might presume, because I think parents aren't absolutists with the age ratings.
Parents have different opinions about different types of content. Some parents may be okay with violent content, but not sex or language. Other parents may be more comfortable with sex or language, but not violence. So it's really important.
They understand exceptions and subjective labels. E or E10 Plus, or PEGI 3 or PEGI 7, they aren't a science. They're arbitrary ratings and a guide. The ESRB determines the acts falling into each category, not parents, not public opinion. Certain things deemed inappropriate for one category might actually not be as upsetting as another act that is deemed suitable. Many parental controls even let you whitelist games, where you might disagree with the rating, so you make them accessible to a younger player. It's discretionary, and not without caveats. Take, for instance, simulated gambling, defined as a player can gamble without betting or wagering real cash or currency. So, pretend gambling. In Alex Kidd and the Enchanted Castle on the Sega Genesis, from the game's start, you are invited to walk into door after open door, all open into gambling parlors, where you're asked to wager one life, bet one Alex, via games of rock, paper, scissors. Entirely chance-based gambling. It's gotta be. It's not all that exhilarating gameplay. In Super Mario Bros. 2, you spend coins you collect through the gameplay on mini slot machines after each level for bonus chances at extra lives. Mario Party mini-games also feature slot machines, while Super Mario RPG has a hidden casino with slots and card games. And in Super Mario 64 DS, you have video poker, roulette, along with slots minigames. Is there a more kid-centric franchise than Super Mario? Are these games actually teen or mature audiences and up? Clearly, no. And yet, our rating system guidelines suggest they should be. The grading system is helpful, but it itself is not perfect. Mild violence doesn't have to describe the act, but could describe the frequency of violent occurrences throughout a game, so there's room for discretion. In-game purchases could be allowed, while unfiltered interactive lobbies or chat with complete strangers, enabled, or location sharing, all part of a game that parents bought into with an E for everyone label, thinking they made a safe purchase decision. Those features don't actually figure into the ratings, yet they also pose dangers to young children. They get sublisted now, but how many people look no further than that letter or number rating? This particular video is not about the rating systems. I think the takeaway here is Intellivision's intent.
There's not a single company that is focused on creating games for kids, and I'm talking like 6 to 8 year olds.
Kids don't have credit cards for games as service, I think is what it is.
Well, the deal is that we're going to change all that, right?
They intend to prove their ecosystem as a fail-safe platform. Parents or educators can trust the nature of their environment. Can Intellivision then get away with a game that is ultimately rated teen or PEGI 12 because its interpretation of violence or crude humor in a game goes slightly over a line and fell on the wrong side of that teen rating?
Boomer, pull my finger.
Yeah. But they'd struggle a bit if it's a frequent pattern. And that line being crossed really should be a gray area. They're not gonna get away with putting out unadulterated sex or graphic dismemberment. And I don't see them going there. They want to build trust.
So our 4 pillars of Intellivision are simple, affordable, family, and entertainment. And that spells out the word safe, because people can trust us.
They have their core audience in mind.
As gamers, they're motivated for creative exploration, achievement, and problem solving. They're least likely, as expected, to use console or PCs to game, and they're least likely to play MMO games. As a group, they have the highest household income, but I will say that all 3 groups were in the 80K range. This group just happens to be at the higher range of the 80K range. And this is the oldest skewing segment, but again, there was a small range for that as well. They were in their 30s, all three groups, in terms of mean age, but this group was on the older skewing of the 30s. most likely to be married, most likely to have children, and to be working full time. So again, very family oriented, and particularly when it comes to young families. So we believe that it's young families also playing with their kids as well.
Everyone is a gamer in some way, shape, or form. And it's not about just media ads. It's not just about reach. There's just so many different opportunities and spaces to be in that you can truly find a way that your brand can connect with any of your consumers in that way.
There's little to gain in breaking this mandate deliberately. The players already occupying that end of the pool are too many, too entrenched, catering to their audience's sweet spot for Intellivision to really make any sort of a splash.
The power gamers. So this makes up 34% of all gamers. They play a lot. So we had put the threshold at 21 hours plus, but they're actually playing closer to 55 hours on average. They skew pretty predominantly male at 80%.
By and large, they should play it safe within the ratings guidelines, so that if and when there's a stray rating, there's not anything newsworthy about it or indicative of a more risque direction. So long that they develop that trust with parents that the system isn't on their list of things to have to worry about and meet expectations of what is safe or worry-free, Intellivision will find a growing audience among families looking for that little bit of peace of mind in their entertainment purchase. E and E10 Plus are their open road to market adoption, and there just isn't incentive to veer very far away from them or undermine that trust proposition with something extreme. They're selling a very different take on gaming, which makes defenders convinced of a zero-sum market share who see Intellivision clawing its way up only by knocking someone else down, Nintendo in this regard, seem oddly insecure. I think they know they're not replacing Nintendo's perch or even the ubiquity of a Fire Kids edition for solitary play. It just isn't happening, especially with Nintendo's growth in other demographics. Intellivision can have the space to coexist by finding the crossroads of family-friendly and their vision of family co-op. And given a little time and exposure, with the variety of good games showcased, that audience will come. Hey, that's one commandment in the books. For those of you looking a little warily at this channel's release history, well, I've got some good news for you. This series is just about under wraps, so new episodes with, I don't know, another 9 tenets are to follow shortly. A very special thanks to all of the panelists on the Amico All Access episode I referenced for their insight and inspiration on a lot of this. If you want some smart reasons why people a lot cleverer than I might change a tenet, better jokes worked into the material, go check out that episode, linked in the show notes, and I think in the upper corner about now if YouTube is playing nicely. And if you dig this sort of long-form dive, there is a lot on the way, both on the Amico front and more general retro topics. Series that have been started and lots of standalones. So stay tuned. Oh, and I'm supposed to say subscribe or plead with you, but you know all that.
Seriously, do it. Do it. Do it.
You'll be my musical slaves forever.
For the Retro Advisory Board, thanks for watching. Until the next video.